Thank you everyone for joining. Great to see you all. We're really excited for National Ocean Month to be welcoming good friend of the lab, Dr. Louise Firth, who's a senior lecturer at University College Cork. Louise is a marine ecologist exploring how humans and coastal ecosystems shape one another across both natural and built environments. Her work blends marine community ecology with historical perspectives and is increasingly multidisciplinary, bringing together engineers, artists, and historians to rethink how we make space for nature in human-dominated coastlines. She focuses on developing practical eco-engineering and nature-based solutions to support biodiversity in a changing world. With over 25 years of international experience across Ireland, the UK, USA, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and South Africa, Louise still has a soft spot for the humble limpet, her favorite species and a small but powerful reminder of resilience at the edge of land and sea. Today, Louise will be sharing insights from her work on the living seawalls in Cork and Plymouth in Ireland. So, Louise, thank you so much for joining, and please take it away.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Alexis. I'm just going to share a screen. And hopefully you were able to see the screen okay? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm a long-standing friend of the lab and Boston more generally. So no, it's really nice to have an opportunity to share our learnings from both Cork and Plymouth, where I've worked between the two different places. Um, First up, there's only one name on this slide at the moment, but this is absolutely a collaborative effort. And I've looked through some of the people who are already on the call. I can see that Jess and Franz are on the call. So yeah, this is a collaborative effort. Many people have featured in the work that I'm basically going to showcase today. And may I just say thank you for the opportunity for doing this, because I haven't actually had an opportunity yet to pull together all of the research from Plymouth or Cork. So it was actually a really lovely exercise for me to actually reflect on all of the wonderful work that's been going on by the wider team. So yeah, thank you, and thank you to the team for all of their hard work. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so we're all very aware. I mean, let's talk about the issue first, and that's the transformation of the global coastline. Of course, in many parts of the world, we're seeing complete replacement of coastal habitats with hard engineered structures like the images that you see on the screen here. Of course, not only are we losing natural habitats like beaches, salt marshes, and mangroves, but we're replacing them with hard engineered structures that are typically poor habitat for marine life. So not only are you losing valuable habitats, but the habitat that you're putting in is not very good for marine life. And that, of course, is leading to loss of biodiversity, the various functions provided by that biodiversity, and the valuable services to society. I feel, given the audience here, you don't need me to talk too much about that, and we're all very well aware of that. But one particular type of artificial structure that we're all very interested in is seawalls. And I'm here to talk about the Living Seawalls projects in Cork and Plymouth. And they are typically placed on environments like this: vertical seawalls at the intertidal section. So when the tide is in, they're partially covered by the sea. And when the tide is out, you have an emerged seawall like you have here in the image here. And that's Dr. Franz Bauer, recently finished his PhD in that image there for scale, just so you can get a sense of how big that seawall is. As I said, these artificial habitats are poor for marine life, and seawalls specifically are very poor because they're often very smooth, they're very vertical, and they don't tend to have rock pools and other important microhabitats that are important for many of the marine organisms that live in these coastal environments. If you were up at the wall where Franz is there, you might notice that there are very few species there. There are some seaweeds, there are some small invertebrates, but largely this entire seawall is really dominated by barnacles, many of which will be a non-native species. There are also many oysters, again, non-native species, and lots of limpets. In our part of the world, limpets do very, very well on coastal infrastructure. You create a hard, smooth environment, it's the perfect habitat for limpets. So you'll often find that you get a bit of dominance of limpets on these environments. And some authors have actually even referred to artificial seawalls like this as limpet barrens, which are akin to the more famous urchin barrens that we tend to find that decimate kelp forests. So living seawalls, those of you who live in the Boston context, I'm sure are well aware of the many living seawalls that you have in Boston. But living seawalls are basically a solution to this problem. Okay, so we're creating all of this hard engineered smooth surface, which is poor for marine life. Living seawalls are basically a multifunctional solution to try to basically make space for nature in that marine built environment, but they're multifunctional. We're interested in enhancing the marine life, but we're also they're very much a human construct as well, and they support both art and education as well. But just looking at the living seawall here, this was one of the original ones that went in Sydney. You can see that they're modular concrete panels, all fitted together, that fit together in a 100% cover across a vertical seawall. And you can see that there are multiple habitat types there. And if we just sort of look into sort of these are the 5 panel types that are in Boston, but also the 5 panel types that we have here in Cork as well. And you can see that there's the control, which is the smooth panel. We have this panel called ridges. We have the swim through, and then we have 2 rock pools. One of them has smaller rock pools, and the other one has larger rock pools. And the idea behind this is different species have different needs. So some species are quite sensitive to temperature differences. Some species like to be covered by water all of the time. Some species may be a bit sensitive to sunlight. So with all of those different needs in mind, if we offer different microhabitats, we're basically offering more chances for many other species to coexist alongside one another. So there's no one particular panel that's, the best in terms of many species, but different species will be able to live on the different types of panels. So it's offering those microhabitats and different niches. That's really what we're striving for here. So I'm here to represent 2 locations. So I spent the last 10 years of my life really in Plymouth in the very southwest of England, where I was living very happily for a long time. And in August 2023, we installed a living seawall right by the Mayflower Steps in the very historic Barbican quarter of Plymouth. And this you can see the image of the living seawall there. This was very soon after installation, maybe about two weeks after installation. So it's very, very freshly installed. I refer to it here as a grassroots installation. This was very much driven by individuals. It was not a well-funded project from the get-go. It basically was a woman called Tina Robinson from Our Only World, a charity, who had been to Sydney, had seen the living seawalls in Sydney, came back to the UK and said, "We need one of these here." And she came to me, and I'm very happy to say, after many conversations and lots of enthusiasm from lots of people, we did manage to install one. But it was grassroots. It was sort of, bottom up people power making this one happen. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the research findings from that one, which has been installed since 2023. About 3 years ago, well, nearly 3 years ago, I moved to Cork in the southwest of Ireland. I'm from Dublin originally, so in some ways I'm sort of coming home in a sense. And there was no living seawall in Ireland, so there was nothing here to begin with. So obviously there was an opportunity that I saw and was really happy to fill it. And this one wasn't a grassroots installation. We actually managed to get pretty good funding to begin with to fund the installation of 2 living seawalls here in Cork. It wasn't funding anything beyond the installation, but at least, having the installation there gave the opportunity to seek other funding after. The first one was installed in September 2025, and that's the image there on the left-hand side. This is on Kennedy Pier, which is in the historic town of Cove in Cork Harbour. Some of you may have been to Cove, or you may know about Cove because of the Titanic fame. This was the last port of call in Europe before the Titanic set off on its journey across the Atlantic. And any of you who have any Irish heritage, the chances are your ancestors may have left from Cove. It used to be called Queenstown, and it was very much the port of embarkation for the mass migration from Ireland over the last 250 years. So it's quite a significant place in terms of connectivity to the rest of the world, I would say. So there you have the installation going in there back in September 2025. And just 2 weeks ago, we completed the installation of a second one, this time again on a slipway, but this time on the other side of Cork Harbour in Ringaskiddy, which is where the main port of Cork is based. So we have two installations which we're very proud of, both funded by Research Ireland. So thank you to them for believing in this. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about some of the physical and biological results. Most of the results that I'm going to talk about are from Plymouth because we have a lot more, it was installed in 2023, so we've had more time to gather data. And I'll be very quick to acknowledge PhD student, now finished PhD student, Dr. Franz Bauer, who led a lot of this research that I'm going to showcase here. So Franz was very interested in many aspects of the living seawall, from the environmental situation in terms of how the panels influence the environment, and also the biology that colonized it, as well as other ecosystem services as well, which I'll very briefly touch on. So I've shown you some pictures of the panels, and just showing you two of the panels here, the control flat panel and the kelp panel, which has a bit more complexity to it. Taking photographs with a thermal imaging camera, Franz was able to get some information about how the temperature differed across the different panels, and how that differed spatially with the various features on the panels. And the colors that you're seeing here, the sort of warmer, so yellow and red colors, are showing you warmer temperature. And then the cooler colors, the sort of blues and purples, are showing you cooler temperatures. And what you'll see from this is basically the flat panel, it's a lot warmer looking, okay? So tends to be, the temperature is actually quite warm that it was experiencing. But you see that there's a bit more variety on the kelp panel. So the shading and the nooks and crannies was basically creating these cooler little microhabitats across the panel. So that's not going to surprise you to see that, but it's nice to actually see some actual quantitative data on that. There's actually not that much out there in the literature actually really properly quantifying such effects. So Franz really was filling an important gap by doing this research. So that's just showing you two of the panels, just showing you like just how it differs across two panel types. But of course, across the entire installation, you can see there's quite a lot of variation there in terms of the different panels showing different thermal microhabitats. And you can see that the control panels really do stand out. They are much warmer in comparison to the other panels that show up the purple and darker colors. So that really is showcasing you the sort of mosaic of the thermal mosaic across the panels. As soon as you have any kind of complexity on the panels, it does definitely bring a cooler, more heterogeneous thermal environment. And that, of course, is very important for the biodiversity that lives on the panels as well. But of course, the biodiversity itself actually brings about changes to the thermal environment as well. So just if we took another one of the panel types, this one is called the sponge fingers, and it's just these sort of protrusions sticking out of the panel. Before it's become colonized, you can see that the tips of the fingers are all much lighter colors, much warmer colors. So that means the tips of the fingers are hot in comparison to the rest of the panel. But as soon as marine life begins to colonize, and in this case here, you can see some juvenile brown seaweeds called fucoids, and you can see that they're typically initially colonizing the upward facing parts of the fingers that are sticking out. And if you look at the thermal image on the right hand side here, you can see the fucoids are much darker, which is showing us that the fucoids are actually cooling down the temperature of the tips of the fingers, which without the fucoids are much hotter. Okay, so not only is the physical features on the panels affecting um uh, the thermal environment, so does the biodiversity. So that's probably not too surprising for many of you, but it's really nice to have actually quantified that, which Franz did an amazing job of that. Um, there is another paper that Franz has that actually does a lot more in terms of the wider environmental environment. And for those of you that are interested, I do encourage you to go and have a look at that paper. There's a lot more information in that than I'm able to cover in this talk. Okay, another thing that Franz was very interested in was basically looking at the effect of the panels on wave overtopping. So this is just one of many types of sort of hydrodynamic response variables that could be measured as part of what might be going on in the water. But just very, very briefly, this was all done in flumes. Okay, you can see an image of the flume tank here. Full-scale panels were actually installed as well as smaller scale panels. And Franz was interested in looking at not only the influence of the panels on their own, so just the physical features, but of course over time they become colonized by marine life. And in our context, they became colonized by these large brown seaweeds. So Franz created these artificial mimics of the brown fucoid seaweeds. And he attached them onto the panels. So he was able to basically look at the effect of the topography on its own, as well as the added topography influence of the actual seaweeds on top of that as well. And he did this using three of the panel types, not all six that we had in Plymouth. And the general take-home message from that was basically that without the seaweeds, the panels actually increased overtopping. So this is basically the movement of water above the structure and onto land effectively above it. But once you had the seaweeds in situ, they actually buffered that. So in some ways, the panels actually enhanced the overtopping, but because of the marine life colonizing, it actually buffered that. So there's sort of positives and negatives to be taken from that, and it's not so straightforward. Another thing that Franz has been measuring basically since the installation of the living seawall has been the biological colonization. So this is one of the major questions that we have in relation to the performance of living seawalls. What marine life will live on these panels? And you can see here just two images here showing you snapshots in time. The first one up here is about 2 weeks after installation, and predictably and expectedly, you have the first stage is basically green algae colonizing. Okay, and that's not at all surprising, and that's exactly what we would have expected. Within a year, we had quite healthy, vigorous growth of the large brown fucoid algae. And you can see here that most of the panel types, okay, are covered by these brown fucoids. And we've highlighted the control panels here, the flat ones, okay, by the shapes here. And you can see that these ones are largely devoid of the brown algae. And there are some edge effects. You can see at the top here, some of these don't have quite as much brown seaweeds. And we think that this might be just sort of an edge effect of the water movement across the top of the panels and could have something to do with pollution effects, maybe with debris and pollutants in the water at the top during high tide. So this is currently in review, but yeah, it's safe to say that the more complex panels definitely supported greater biodiversity and also greater biomass of organisms in comparison to the flat panels, which is not at all surprising. There's a lot more to this, and I don't have time to go into the details of it. And hopefully, very soon we'll be able to share the paper of that if and when it gets published. But just yeah, very simply, just simple findings. Yeah, basically the complexity works in terms of biodiversity in comparison to the control panels. So this is part of a global experiment and a global partnership. Okay, I've just shown you some of the findings from Plymouth, and we also obviously have an installation here in Cork in Ireland. But there are many all over the world. There's obviously a couple in Boston at least as well. And the dots here are just showing you where some of the installations are around the world. In Australia, there's many, so there's actually many more than it looks like just looking at this map. And this allows us to actually look at how the panels and living seawalls perform in different environments, but also with different biogeographic settings. And it'll also enable us to tease out all sorts of questions that we might have about geographic variability and latitudinal variability. And um, Kyle Hilliam from Sydney is currently working up the data in relation to some of this. So hopefully there'll be some findings from this within the next maybe year or two when the paper eventually comes out. But we just published a paper just a little bit earlier this year, just showing this was basically a simple study comparing emergent rock and rock pools. But we were very interested in looking at this across a latitudinal gradient. And just very simply, I'm just going to show you just a couple of the results to show you that we really do expect to see huge differences in terms of the performance of living seawalls and the various different panel types in different places. Just simply here, you're just looking at the sort of orange color showing you the total numbers of species on rock in comparison to pools. And yes, you can see that irrespective of latitude here along the x-axis, pools typically always supported more species, but in sort of opposite to what we might expect. There's normally you would see a hump shape around the equator. What we found with this study was that actually neither habitat actually shows that typical higher diversity in the equator, and it was actually higher at higher latitudes in comparison to the equator. So it sort of bucks the latitudinal diversity trend. And on the right-hand side here, that panel is basically showing you the unique taxa. So the ones that were only found in either rock pools or on emergent rock. And you can see that the result is even more pronounced. As soon as you sort of move into the northern hemisphere, the pools are supporting more unique taxa than the emergent rock. So that's showing us that they're even more different at higher latitudes than they are at the equator. So it's quite interesting to sort of try and tease that out across latitudes. And you can be sure once the Sydney team and Kyle have performed this analysis, we'll have some really interesting results to show in relation to how living seawalls perform geographically. Okay, so just to sort of show you some of the beasties that are living on the living seawalls in Plymouth. And you can see this might be familiar to those of you from Boston. This is Littorina littorea, which is the edible winkle, native in our part of the world, but obviously not so native, although that's debatable. I think Jarrett's on this call as well. So yeah, considered non-native in the Northeast America. Another winkle, flat winkle that we have here, and of course you get crabs living in the nooks and crannies. But I wanted to sort of highlight one particular species that is a curious one for us, is the limpet. This limpet has actually moved onto the panels. Okay, so in Plymouth, like I said, they have been in since 2023. If you look at the wider seawall around the living seawalls in Plymouth, it's covered in limpets. They're like dominated by limpets. So in time, we may expect that limpets will become more abundant on the living seawalls panels, but for now they're fairly limited in terms of their abundance because they're not able to crawl onto it so easily, and it's been dominated by seaweed, so that it's hard for them to colonize from the water column. But we do expect them to have quite a strong influence on the panels in time. And that's because they're very important grazers in our system. So they may have an influence in grazing down the seaweed when they eventually get onto it. So just to sort of show you how important they are in our system, this is actually an image of the steps that go all the way down to the living seawall. You can see it there very soon after installation. It's almost devoid of life there, but you can see that there was obviously a very nice settlement of green seaweed onto this steps. Those of you who work in the council would look at that as an absolute health and safety nightmare because it's going to be so slippy. But what I want to draw your attention to is this sort of halo around the edge here. And I've already sort of prepared you for what's causing that halo. Lo and behold, it's limpets. Look on the vertical sides here. Look at all those little green dots that you're looking at. Each of those is a limpet. And when the tide is in, those limpets will be coming up over the sides and they're grazing away here. So they're very much the cows of the intertidal, and they have a really, really strong moderating effect on seaweed in our system anyway. So they're really, really important in our system. And sure enough, on verticals, they will often feed a bit more regularly than they do on horizontals, because they're more susceptible to predation by birds, and also being stamped on by people and everything. So they do quite well on verticals, and they can graze all the time on verticals as well. So as I said, they're key grazers in our system, and one might even refer to them as ecosystem engineers. This paper just came out on the 13th of June, so just this week I was actually working on the final edits of it. Please don't, if you're interested in this, please don't download it now. I don't know why the journals put up the proof before it's been corrected. So yeah, just maybe give it a week when the final paper is actually ready, and then you'll be able to download the full thing properly without all of the proof. Yeah, I don't know why they do that. It annoys me. Um, but in our system, they're very important. And like I say, we could refer to them as ecosystem engineers. I enjoyed writing that paper, and I enjoyed even more pulling together the graphic abstract. This was my graphic abstract for the paper: Limpet, grazer, sculptor, facilitator, food, perhaps the most overlooked ecosystem engineer and service provider of our time. Um, some of you might think that this looks a little bit familiar. I'm hoping those of you who are about my age will recognize it's a bit of a nod to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So limpets in this context, ecosystem engineers, which have profound effects on the environment. You can almost think of them as a spy, a double agent sort of hiding in plain sight. People don't really think of limpets as ecosystem engineers having this, hugely moderating and habitat forming role in the ecosystem. But I think I make a fairly good case for it in the paper that some limpets could be classed as ecosystem engineers anyway. Okay, so much so are they important in our system that because we have a second living seawall in Cork, we've decided to actually test their importance. And this was just over a week ago. Myself and Corinne had a great laugh going out collecting limpets and transplanting them onto a half of the living seawall at our second location. I was actually surprised that you can really just stick them on and they will stay. I thought we would have to be holding them on for, 10 minutes at a time. But no, their survival instincts are great, and they really were clamping on for dear life. So yeah, we will watch this space. We will see how the limpets get on and see how it changes the trajectory of the panel. So this is Corinne, PhD student here in Plymouth, who's been here since September. And this actually is a nice follow on from her master's work in California, where she was actually looking at the role of limpets and complexity in determining biodiversity patterns on coastal infrastructure. So it's a natural follow on for her, but just in a very different context. And hopefully soon, very soon, that paper from her master's work will be coming out in Journal of Applied Ecology. So well done, Corinne. And yeah, I'm very curious to see how the results play out with the limpets on the panels. Okay, so sort of moving on from the biology side of things. So sticking with the living seawalls in Plymouth, where we've had more time to generate information and data, and there's been a lot more research carried out. PhD student Jess Allen, who's currently sort of in the writing up and finalization stages of her PhD at the University of Plymouth, and I know she's on this call. One of the things that Jess was interested in was looking at the sort of social perceptions of the living seawall. So this is addressing the multifunctionality side of things. So now thinking about humans rather than the marine life per se. And she ran a workshop and handed out questionnaires to the public and also to stakeholders, looking at their opinions about what the aesthetic appeal of seawalls and the kinds of marine life that may or may not be colonizing them. So the questionnaire showed these images here, showing you different marine life on the panels. And the main take home from this was, irrespective of whether it was stakeholders or the public, the most favored image was this one C with the green ulva algae. And the least favored was this plain vertical concrete seawall with no life living on it. So I think, that you can possibly think maybe color is important to people. Maybe it's the texture of the wall as well as color. But certainly it tells us something about what people think in terms of what they like to look at on coastal infrastructure. Also, as part of that work, Jess was curious to hear about people's understanding and knowledge of greening of grey infrastructure or GGI. And it's important to sort of look at this in the context of these are sector experts, so these were our stakeholders, and this one on the right-hand side is the public. And it's basically just showing you today versus going further back in time. And we said when did you first hear of greening of grey infrastructure? Was it today? Was it over a month ago? Was it over 6 months ago? And so on. And you can see quite a different pattern here. Most of our sector experts, none of them had heard about it that day. They were all aware of it at that point, and most of them were actually aware of it for at least 5 years. Whereas the public, unsurprisingly, many of them actually had only heard about it for the first time when they encountered the questionnaire and the event that they might have met Jess at. So it just shows you the importance of these kind of public events in raising awareness of things like greening of grey infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And the other thing, this is quite a busy slide, so I won't go into it in too much detail. But another thing that Jess was really interested in was the social perceptions of the various benefits that can be gleaned from things like greening of grey infrastructure. And the colours here are showing you the ecological benefits in green, the sort of structural benefits in blue, social benefits in orange, and economic benefits are in pink. I'm only showing you part of the figure here. There's pink on another part of it. But the take-home message here is the ones that they ranked highest. Okay, so this is going in terms of the highest ranking at the top to the lowest ranking. You'll see that there's a lot more green at the top of the panel, which is showing us that the public were ranking ecological benefits higher than other types of benefits. Part of me does wonder, is that because the people sort of running the event were ecologists? But I do think we can take something from that in that genuinely that is what people do rank more highly. So just some interesting findings there in terms of what people expect from this and what they value. Okay, so just sort of shout out to Jess and the wider work going on here as well. So eco-engineering and the Living Seawalls is only one of many kinds of approaches to nature-based solutions. And Jess was curious to sort of try to build the evidence base on the kinds of greening of grey infrastructure, including living seawalls, and how they actually are performing and the major sort of take-home messages from that globally. So she's currently in the middle of a major review of this. But as part of that major review, she and a wider team, some of who might be actually on this call, so thank you for your contributions. There's basically a protocol that's already been published, which shows how we are going about, or how Jess and Anel Lamasson, who's very much a driver behind this, are driving forward the methods for pulling together this evidence base. So watch this space that's currently in process. So hopefully over the next couple of years, that paper on the full meta-analysis and the results will actually be available to share. But just shout out to the huge amount of work that goes into that, led by Jess and Anel as well. Okay, so just sticking with the multifunctionality side of things, knowledge exchange and sharing, in a two-way direction is very much part of what we're doing here with the Living Seawalls and globally, I would say. And of course, there's many opportunities for public events and showcases. And just in these two images here from Plymouth, you can see this one here. There's Franz dressed as a pirate as part of the Pirate Weekend in Plymouth. And there's Jess working with inland and coastal marine systems going to showcases around the country in the UK as part of that. So there's lots of things happening in that space in terms of events and showcases. And we've been doing quite a lot of that work in Cork as well. So the weather finally got a bit better here in Cork, and we've been out a lot over the last 2 months, including a couple of school visits. Here you have Soli Levi and Corinne Knapp at a school here in Cork. working with the kids here and showcasing to the kids all about living seawalls. And on the right here, you can see Corinne indoctrinating the children into understanding what limpets are. So we're sort of getting them young and hopefully gathering, maybe we'll see some of them studying limpets in the near future. So lots going on in that space. And also, we're very proud to have just completed a wonderful art science education collaboration with local artists here in Cork, Leah Murphy and Susan Walsh. And this was the Tools of the Trade exhibition, which was launched a couple of weeks ago. And you can see here that there's a sort of a mosaic miniature living seawall with these lovely imprints of these panels that the children have made. So this was very much part of a major exhibition of the children's artwork that was co-created with the local artists and local schools, but inspired by Living Seawalls. So this was very much driven forward by Soli Levy and Corinne Knapp and myself. And this is just showing you some of the artworks produced by the children. And you can see these are the tools of the trade is sort of like it's about showcasing the kind of tools that people use in their work. So I love the fact that a digital camera and calipers and a Transect tape make it as artworks and as part of this. So really heartwarming, wonderful stuff to see. And you can be sure that many of those children were inspired and we might see them interested in nature-based solutions in the future and marine life and art. And all of that culminated in a major event that happened here in Cork just a couple of weekends ago. There's Soli and there's Leah and Susie as part of the Carnival of Science. We had a tent there showcasing the living seawalls and tools of the trade. And some of you may even recognize Meryl Schultz there, a former student from UMass Boston, who's now actually here with us at University College Cork. And there's another volunteer summer law from Hong Kong who's here helping us to showcase living seawalls here in Cork this summer as part of her intern. So lots going on in that space. So really loads to say about the knowledge exchange side of things, which is really, really important and a lot of fun, I will say. Okay, but importantly, where is all this going and why is it important? From our perspective, okay, I'm not in Ireland, which is back in the EU. It's really important from a national and an EU perspective, but also a global perspective as well, because it very much aligns with various national, regional, and global goals. I won't go into too much detail about the national ones, but I will showcase that there are many sort of more biological ones, but also artistic and heritage cultural goals that are important here. But at an EU and a global level, it very much feeds into the EU biodiversity strategy, the very recent EU nature restoration law, and things like the UNESCO Culture 2030 indicators, as well as the EU work plan for culture. So lots of important goals here that I feel that the Living Seawalls absolutely addresses in a major way. So yeah, it's really important to recognize how this can map on, especially to things like the Sustainable Development Goals, which I've only featured a few along the bottom there. Oh, and so where to next? Okay, so I'm just showing you some of the great work that's been going on, but fingers crossed, hopefully within the next week and a half, and I can see Anne smiling on the call. Come on. Yeah, we have a proposal in the works at the moment with Creative Ireland, and this would be to fund what we are calling the Marsh to Metropolis Trail, which is basically basically designing a trail around the city of Cork that will basically transform Cork's reclaimed coastline into a living cultural trail, exploring climate risk, biodiversity loss, and nature-based solutions. So we've got 3 nodes already identified. I won't go into too much detail about them, but they're all linked to climate change in some sense. But in the context of this call, the Living Seawalls in Cove, or formerly Queenstown, is one of our nodes, as is Boston. So Boston is a huge inspiration for this as well. And if we get this funding, one of the nodes will be in Boston, and we will have the opportunity to collaborate with the Stone Living Lab and hopefully Boston Harbour now and various people who are on this call. So get your prayer mats out, do a rain dance, whatever. Fingers crossed. It would be really, really, really lovely to get this call or to get this grant. So yeah, it would be amazing to work with you all. Um, so yeah, so really just to wrap up, lots to say, lots of reflection going on. It was really nice to pull this talk together, but lessons learned. There's obviously challenges and opportunities to everything. And the opportunities, sort of positives from working on living seawalls in two different countries. There's a lot of enthusiasm for them, and that is a great thing. People get it. Funders, the public, educators, people get it. It's, there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. Um, it is obviously also amazing global partnership, which I'm very proud and happy to be part of. People power, all of this requires people, and some of it really can be grassroots, as I've demonstrated in Plymouth. Um, and it's multidisciplinary. You can come at this from so many different angles. I started off as a biologist, but I'm very much leaning a bit away from biology now. I'm far more interested in humans, social science, and art education through that process. So that's been a wonderful journey for me personally. And importantly, it does attract funding. I can safely say that in Ireland in particular, it's been much easier to get funding than it was in the UK. So yeah, Living Seawalls, I think is great. It's great for attracting funding. Of course, there are challenges. Enthusiasm is a good thing, but enthusiasm does mean that everyone wants this, everyone wants to hear about it, everyone wants to talk to you, which is amazing. But when you start off as only one person, it can be a lot. So yeah, it does require having a team around to be able to satisfy that enthusiasm because there's a lot of it. There could, of course, be permitting challenges in Plymouth, and we certainly had that. But yeah, that is something that is ultimately always going to be something to consider. If anyone's ever thinking about doing this, and I know the Living Seawalls is sort of gathering traction globally, I would say have a team in place if possible. Don't be a lone wolf as I was arriving in Cork with no team, no collaborators. So it's been challenging, but it worked out. And we're all very much at the behest of short funding cycles, which leads to short staffing cycles as well. So it's constantly sort of trying to keep the wheels turning on that. But all in, yeah, nothing but positive things to say. And I think this will sort of lends itself nicely for me to showcase an event that's coming up in Cork on the 30th of June. So we're hosting a coastal nature-based solutions event on the 30th of June, which is the Tuesday. And Boston's own Professor Catherine DeForn from the Stone Living Lab will be showcasing the many nature-based solutions that are going in Boston Harbour. So if any of you are interested in attending that, you can attend online. The link is just there, but I've also put it in the chat if you want to register to attend that event. I'm going to finish on this last slide. And I think the busyness of this slide speaks for itself that, as I said, the slide, I started off with only my own name on the slide, but this is absolutely a partnership and there are hundreds of people behind all of this work coming together. And I thank you all. And I won't take up any more of this time, but a special shout out to Franz and Jess in Plymouth, whose work I was very much showcasing there because it's largely complete. But also to Soli and Corinne in Cork as well, who are very much getting started on their journeys with Living Seawalls. Thank you. Nope, I'll stop sharing.
Louise, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Just really appreciate all the work you're doing, both in Cork and Plymouth and everywhere else. And the collaboration that you've had with Katie and how that's led into further partnership and collaboration with the Stone Living Lab. And yeah, just really good stuff. So we had a couple of questions in the chat here. We got a few, so I'll start with Renee's, who wrote, I may have missed it at the beginning of the seminar, but do you add the plant and animals to the wall, or do you place the infrastructure and hopefully watch both the native flora, fauna attached to it, or both?
Thank you for that question. The answer is both. In Plymouth, we very much just left it. So we put up the panels and just let nature take its course. But from learning about Plymouth, and it was limpets were very slow to colonize the living seawall there. We also only had one living seawall, so we sort of couldn't really manipulate it too much. But learning what we did in Plymouth, we were very curious here in Cork to see how limpets might affect the trajectory. So when we installed a second living seawall here, we basically split that one in half, and we have transplanted limpets onto half of that living seawall, and we'll hopefully be able to monitor the difference over time. So both. Um, I would say the more you tinker with things, the more challenging it is. So like in an ideal world, it would be best to just leave it to nature. But curiosity was too great here. We just had to transplant those limpets.
Thanks so much, Louise. John Sullivan had a great question too. He wrote, I understand the primary materials for these tiles are eco-concrete, glass fiber, reinforced concrete, and recycled materials. Is any one material more attractive to organisms? And Jarrett, Katie, also feel free to jump in here for the Boston context too. But we'll start with Louise.
Um, it would depend on the species, and it would depend on the material. So some organisms will love wood, for instance, things like shipworms would love wood, whereas other organisms would do very well on concrete. Metal, probably to a lesser degree, would be attractive to things. So it really does depend. There is a big review paper that came out. I think it was Kate Dodds that led it. It was a big meta-analysis looking at material type, and how that influenced the different marine life. So if you really want to kind of drill down into that, I would look for that review paper. But maybe Jarrett or Katie might want to comment in the Boston context.
Sure. Here, there are definitely material differences that we see between different seawalls. This is something that we've played around looking at. Oh, actually, wait, your monitor over here. So I'm looking at the camera. So we've played around looking at some of the different seawalls and different materials. You definitely get different species compositions, particularly when you get things like metal, and a lot of it has to do with material properties. But our panels are all made of the same stuff, so that'll be really nice for comparison from site to site across the ocean.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jarrett.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, one thing maybe to add, in places where you have older heritage walls that have the nooks and crannies that have the natural topographic features, they can often be quite good for marine life because they have that sort of natural complexity and they've had longer to wear in comparison to like a modern or concrete seawall. So sometimes, yeah, if you have an older structure, it can often be like full of life for lots of reasons.
Thanks so much, Jarrett and Louise. Have a good question from Shannon here as well, who says, with the placement of limpets, are you looking at different starting dates, i.e., allowing more and different times for initial algal colonization before limpet placement?
So for now, at the moment, we are just testing will they actually survive. So we just went out immediately after the living seawall was installed, and the first test was can we just transplant them at all and see if they survive. So for the first 3 days, they seemed to do okay. We kept going back and sort of replenishing them just in the hope that we after we leave it for a while they'll stay. But we haven't been back since, so it'll be interesting to see when we go back to see have they survived. You sort of need to do it sooner rather than later, because if we left it too long, the whole seawall will be covered in green seaweed. So it would be very difficult to transplant onto the seaweed. They just wouldn't attach. So you sort of have to do it immediately after installation, otherwise you miss that window. So we think we caught it, but let's see if they survive. I mean, they could all have been washed off. There could have been there wasn't a storm, but they could have all been washed off. Yeah, no, but yeah, as soon as it greens up, it would be very difficult to transplant limpets on anyway.
Thanks, Shannon. Louise, we'll go to the raised hands here. We have Meredith and then Paul. And we'll probably wrap after that. Maybe we'll have time for Anne's question as well, but we have a few announcements towards the end that we want to make sure we make time for. So, Meredith, take it away.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I'm a graduate student here at UMass Boston. And I had a question about those historic sites. Like I know you mentioned the Port of Cork, and what it's like installing there, if there's like complex permits or any like public pushback or engagement with that.
So we are partnering with the Port of Cork on this project. So the two locations in Cork are both Port of Cork land. So they deal with that side of things. It's not public land. If it was public land, you would absolutely need to go through the permitting system. And in the UK, we did need to go through the permitting system. But Port of Cork, it's their land. So not as complex as it could have been, shall we say. Pushback. There's always going to be pushback to certain things. I mean, one of the very first times we were actually down on the slipway on the boat ramp, looking at it, there were people coming in on kayaks, and they were complaining to us about, that this was now in their way that they would walk up the slipway, and they were complaining about it. So, that's it is what it is, and there's always going to be people who aren't happy to see that kind of thing. We one of the things that we did have to do with it is we had to install a handrail on the outside of it because it is a working slipway. So you can imagine there's quite a lot of foot traffic. So from a public health and safety perspective, we had to put a handrail. And I mean, other sort of pushback from it, we learned from the UK in Plymouth. The one thing that nearly stopped it going in the water was the concern that it might become colonized by the invasive oyster Magellana gigas, which is from the Pacific, and guaranteed. Like the straight answer was it is guaranteed to colonize this seawall. And the only way that they allowed us to actually install it was we have to remove all of the invasive oysters as they arrive, and if it ever became completely dominated, we have to take down the entire living seawall. So that's part of the permitting process. If that's useful information.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Thanks, Louise. Paul.
Uh, good to see you again, Louise.
And you, Paul?
Two quick observations and one question. It was good to see Meryl Schultz tell us how to say hello. Second of all, you showed ecological characteristics versus latitude. It seems to me you also have to consider other driving factors. I mean, for example, the latitude of Boston is the same as the latitude of Rome, and they're, very different coastlines. The question is, have you found people being drawn to the coast because of because of living shorelines, living seawalls? I mean, people, as a social co-benefit, people actually going to the coast to look at these systems, to look at them, or perhaps even fish there.
And Paul, that's such a great question. And if it's okay, Louise, that actually really complements Anne's questions too. I'll just read it because I think they go together really well. She writes, one of the things I'm interested in is how environments shape attention and learning. Have you observed any changes in how people attend, to or perceive harbor environments after engaging with the project? So yeah, very, very important and similar questions.
Thanks, Paul.
The short answer is yes, definitely. From Plymouth, it's anecdotal, but these are from conversations that we've had with fisher people in Plymouth. They actively fish above the living seawall because they say the fishing is better above the living seawall. So straight away there's some information. But in terms of people engaging with the coast that may not necessarily do that anyway, already here in Cork, the children, the two schools that we visited, one was literally up the road from where the living seawall was. The children had never even heard of it, and they hadn't been down to it. And of course, that then led to greater engagement. So a lot of those children who live in that town, they might not have ever walked on that slipway. So that I think already has had an influence. And I mean, the media here has been quite good. It has been picked up, and that there has been a lot of interest in it. And I know a lot of people have been sort of walking down towards it as a result. So yes, I think is anecdotal, but hopefully we might be able to capture that as well through some of the questionnaires. Actually, Meryl Schultz is very interested in the engagement side of things, particularly from an art perspective, and that we may pick up on some data from that through her questionnaires.
Yeah, we hope to do some more work on that in Boston, on the social co-benefits.
Oh,
So
definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I
You
think
know, and
especially when you're working with children, like we worked with the artists' tools of the trade. And we last year we did something similar. We took the children to the Rocky Shore. Most of them had never been to the sea, even though they live in Cork, which is a very coastal environment. But it just shows you, like, we're very privileged, to have access to, a car and to be able to get to the coast. So just that alone, we will have had an impact. I know people, some of the children were saying, "Is this the countryside?" And they were commenting how quiet it was. These are urban kids. They live in a highly
yeah,
urbanized environment. So yeah, yeah, it was heartwarming. Yeah.
thank you
Louise,
again.
that's such a great insight. And we are having similar sort of experiences here in Boston, both with the structured field trips we do. And, when Katie and Elisa, other members of our team are in the field, just the people that we engage and interact with. Jarrett talks about how, when they're at the Fan Pier site, the folks that are kind of looking over the edge and sort of asking them, what the heck are you doing down there? So it's pretty cool. So thank you all for the questions. Thank you so much, Louise, for such a wonderful presentation and Q&A as well. And I'm going to hand it over to Alexis to close us out to talk about next month and an upcoming Living Seawalls field trip as well. But thank you again, Louise.
Yes, thanks, Joe, and thanks again, Louise. As Louise mentioned, there's a couple of Living Seawall installations here in Boston, and we're going to be hosting free tours of the Living Seawalls at Condor Street Urban Wild in East Boston, the first of which will be next Friday on June 26th, which is a great opportunity to see the panels in person and just learn more about Stone Living Lab projects. And finally, our next month's seminar will be on July 16 and will feature Paula Sylvia, who is the director of aquaculture and blue technology department at the Port of San Diego, and she will be speaking about ocean positive and blue economy innovation happening at the Port of San Diego. So if you're interested in joining us for either of those events, you can scan the QR code on the screen to register. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a great day.